All right. Hello and welcome back to Nerds of Legend, everyone. I'm Ben. Next to me is Brian, and then below me is Brendan. Joel is not able to attend this week due to some personal conflicts. And this week, we decided to continue with our little spooky season stuff, and we decided, whoa, hello, Brian. Looking particularly. You try attempting roll for seduction. We are
Come back to vampire.
yes, exactly. We decided to revisit vampires, which is
To be
why.
honest, I was avoiding that part of the screen. It was too creepy. Staring into my soul there.
Yeah, no, I was like, ah, okay. But so we are back on it. We decided to go back to vampires because we didn't feel like we were talked about it long enough to quite give the subject justice. We kind of went into the bare, sort of ancient history up until the Victorian era of vampires. But I feel like we felt like in order to really give the whole impression of what we think of as a modern day vampire, we wanted to give a little bit more focus to the Victorian and modern era because that's what most people are aware of. We kind of just talked about the ancient stuff, the spooky stuff of the vampire, but it's kind of time to go into like when vampires became sexy. And Brian, why don't you take it away?
Well, if we're really going to go with popular consciousness and becoming sexy vampires as opposed to horrific monsters, then one has to talk about like the early Victorian novels, such as like the Carmillas and the Bram Stoker's Dracula and whatnot.
Right. Yeah.
However, if we're really going to talk about like popular consciousness today, sort of thing, then I think the most important point is Anne Rice, Interview with the Vampire.
It's true. That is kind of where it kind of divulged into like pure sexy time instead of
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Because imagine like you've got the whole Nosferatu sort of thing. You've got the Count Orlok, and he's got these monstrous qualities. It's still classified as like a horror genre, even when you get to like proper universal Dracula. He's someone to be feared. You get the Hammer horror series, and even though Dracula's a motherfucking pimp who's played by Christopher Lee, he's still this monster, you know what I'm saying? But like once you get to Anne Rice and Interview with the Vampire in like 1993, sexy switch has been flipped.
Like all head full.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you're going to really talk popular consciousness and where the sexy vampire comes from, then Interview with the Vampire is where you want to start.
All right. So, I'm not sure.
But let's skip the bullshit for a second here.
Yeah.
Let's skip it. Skip
All right.
it. Fuck it. We're doing it live.
Fuck it. All right. What are we doing, Brian?
We could talk all day about the historical thing of like vampires and how they became sexy in terms of popular consciousness, and we could inform the viewer and all that shit. But no. You know what? I want to know what vampires mean to you.
Go on.
Is that for the class or specifically Ben?
Oh yeah, that's for the class. We're doing it.
We're doing
What
it.
do vampires mean to you? How do you use them? What is your favorite type of vampire? What perhaps is your favorite vampire medium? Are we talking like True Blood? Are you in that category? Or are you like thinking to yourself, I don't like those Twilight bitches. I like something a little bit harder. You know what I'm saying? Are vampires like a monster that you use in D&D constantly because they're fucking easy as terms of like, powerful undead that, don't just die with like one hit like a zombie does, Like,
Yeah.
where are you
As I
at
learned
on vampires?
as I learned when trying to bring skeletons to the campaign last week.
Oh yeah.
Mm,
Yes,
fucking horse died.
instantly. Just
Fucking dead
pulverized it.
horse. I mean, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but like, we need to.
So
Wow.
I think for me, I'm just gonna ignore that one. I think for me, the most wasn't really like into like the vampire thing. So like I was kind of came, like I feel like vampires are something you hit kind of like at your high school time, maybe a little bit after. And I grew up in like it was post Buffy, it was like Twilight was in full fucking swing and I wasn't having any of that. So like I feel like vampires had been like done to death, but I love the shit out of my like st- underworld stuff, like just like badass vamps that can turn into like evil monster bats. But like I really think like my biggest probably like pop culture exposure to vampires was probably like Elder Scrolls, you know.
Hmm.
So like that my first Oblivion character made him into a vampire. My first Skyrim character made him into a vampire purely because like the power boost just from like do so like for Skyrim they took away like all of the cons of being a vampire. It was just like ultra power boost. And then same but like Oblivion you kind of really had to completely alter your gameplay. But those were like my probably biggest like times where like I was like all about the vampire stuff, and it's not strictly like your run of the mill sort of you know they don't go the Elder Scrolls games don't go the same way with vampires as like other pop culture does. In the both games, I believe it is the well at least for Oblivion it's the Porphyria that you contract and become a vampire, but Skyrim is there's multiple ways. You can either get the disease or you can like get brought into the embrace by like a vampire family. So that's kind of like my where my sort of vampire stuff goes on. I like it in the like when they were still doing the modern day monster vampire movies, Blade, Underworld, that sort of thing. But the whole like romantic thing is where I get lost all the time because I'm like, yes, Edward. Great. Another abusive relationship that everyone's going to swoon over.
Indeed. What about you, Brendan?
I, hmm. I would say the 90s onward, the 90s to like late 2000s, business was booming for vamps, right? I think the reason why is because they were almost reduced to their most base benefits,
Mm-hmm. And
right?
qualities, yeah.
And qualities. You have attractiveness, immortality, enhanced speed, flight, metamorphosis, and then you have weaknesses. They're essentially reduced to a power set. They're reduced almost to
Mm-hmm.
superheroes. You have some vague references to their society. Um, most most, if not all, structure of vampires is taken from the Blade films, and then Anne Rice, and down from that, Vampire the Masquerade. Other than that, you have the Brood, the WWE faction with Edge and Christian and Gangrel, which is derivative of that. Um, in the public consciousness, vampires are ponytails and European suits and having sex forever. Um, I I think there's a part of me that's always drawn back to the first example of vampires I'd ever seen. I was at my grandmother's house in Oak Lawn, where Dwayne Wade went to high school, and I'm watching a late '80s Fred Dekker movie called The Monster Squad, which is essentially like 12-year-olds and high schoolers are killing the Universal movie monsters, right? Um, the first Dracula analog I see in that film. Is I mean, there's scheming, there's conniving, there's turning into bats, driving around in a spectral car. There's plotting and perfidy involved, and I think vampires to me are an insidious balance of the allure of immortal power and the burden that comes with it. It's very to me, it's a lot more uh, like the classical Faustian tale of making a deal with Mephistopheles and having to live with the consequences. The most important and alluring message to me in Interview with the Vampire is Anne Rice's conceptual idea that vampires it's extremely rare for vampires to live more than what like 150 years
Mm-hmm.
because the individual goes insane far before they live that long just
Mm-hmm.
because the psyche is outpaced by the weight of the decision making of becoming a vampire and all of your friends and family are gone that your humanity this is covered in White Wolf your humanity is slowly stripped away the things that draw us to the enjoyment of life having children having families having loved ones
Mm-hmm.
that's stuff sort of you have a pale imitation but it's gone right seeing
Right, and
sunrise is gone
you've become this thing that's just been left behind by the times. It's like a relic from the
right
past that
right
you know.
yeah I mean you look at Bram Stoker's Dracula and essentially his sustained existence was of spite right he was
Mm-hmm.
alive in spite of the consequences of his actions and the loss of his love essentially spitting in the face of his creator
Mm-hmm.
um spite can take you a long way as you know watch Seinfeld you'll see why but
Mm-hmm.
that to me that's different than being like oh like game genie vampires right run higher jump faster live forever there has to be consequences for that in equal measure you look at Strad von Zarevich in the original AD&D the 1983 module he's essentially persisting very similar to the Bram Stoker Dracula um, his the woman he loved is out of his reach I think he holds his brother responsible. There, the resolution of Strahd's story is randomized based on like a tarot deck mechanic in that first module. But there's a story of loss, of grief, and grief so powerful that the sands of time are not enough to erase it.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is vampirism. Profound, tragic, persistent grief personified. If that's an answer for you.
Now, is Strahd? Uh, is he in the original AD&D? Was he in Shadowfell? Like, was he a Dark
I
Lord of
mean,
Shadowfell?
Ravenloft, yes.
Okay, in the original run as well, or
In the original run, I think it was a little less fleshed out in terms of like what Ravenloft was, but
okay,
yes,
Yeah.
he was always in Ravenloft
okay.
proper. Now, whether or not Ravenloft even back then was like part of its own demi-plane that
Mm-hmm.
was because that's what it is. It's a
Yeah,
demi-plane separate from everything else. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? It's not
trapped
like
in the mists, like
yeah,
basically. Because my understanding of like a lot of what goes on in like Ravenloft and Shadowfell is it's sort of like an almost maintenance of the status quo. It's trying to like it's there's no it's unchanging. Like so even if
Yeah.
like things even if you like defeat the villain and end the thing, then it just resets again.
Well,
sort of.
So
it's more cinematic than anything. The persistence of Ravenloft in the original
mhm.
module, like this is predating the campaign setting. The persistence of Ravenloft in the mists and the way it is more of a side effect of the persistence of Strahd.
Okay.
So when I ran the module, when you defeat Strahd, he becomes like a mist form, or he'll evolve into bats or whatever, and he'll reform, and he will try to escape and regenerate.
Mm-hmm.
And so technically with my party, the win condition was the Sun Sword.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made it so that they defeated Strahd initially. They were able to recognize that his form was trying to escape, found it reforming in a coffin, and then had this final, you know, coup de grace. Um, because of the fact that they're in a different campaign setting, and Ravenloft was supposed to be a Halloween special, which they dragged out for 8 weeks because we are having so much fun. I allowed them to have a final ending for it because Ravenloft was this compartmentalized experience that they would return from. If you're running like a Greyhawk campaign or an old school campaign or specifically a Ravenloft campaign, the permanence of that plane definitely could probably be, is something that they lean towards more. It also makes the campaign setting or the module more challenging. For me, for the purpose of what I was using it for, I was okay with tying it with a bow.
Yeah.
But the persistence of that plane is an extension of Strahd's persistence.
I see. Okay.
And the reason why it's so permanent is not even necessarily just because, like, oh, that's how it is, sort of thing. It goes into the deeper backstory behind the different demi-planes of dread and whatnot, and what ties them all together, namely the dark powers.
Yeah,
because it's not simply just a thing about, oh, hey, Strahd's some evil bad guy. No, the reason why he's here, the reason why they're all here is because hell is too much of a rest for these guys. They need to be punished.
Yep.
Yeah, so they have to relive basically their worst memories over and over and over again.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Like, the dark powers will actively get involved, and, like, a great example of this is Lord Soth. Not a vampire, but, he's this ancient immortal warrior who hails from Dragonlance and Kryn and whatnot.
Yeah.
And, here he is. He has this woman, much like Strahd von Zarovich, where, like, he's always after Kitiara. He's always after this, woman who he lost and whatnot. And he goes so far as to, like, even build, like, these magic mirrors that, like, he can step into and kind of get, like, a brief. But, like, eventually it does nothing for him. And this leads into one of the best books in, like, the D&D kind of, like, book line, Night of the Black Rose, where he just kind of gives up. He's just like, I'm done with this shit. Like, it's not so much that he's ignoring it because he can't, but, like, he's just like, yeah, okay.
Just
I fucked up. I did it, know. Like, he just basically, and because every dread realm is held together by the will of their ruler, like, the entire plane just starts, like, coming apart and whatnot.
That's because the dread realms are basically like, it's focused around, like, the obsession of their dreadlord, and so, like, if the dreadlord gives up on that obsession, then it comes apart, which is kind of like the point, is sort of like leech to that dreadlord of that, like, obsession almost. It's fun. Maybe that should be our next book after Foundation.
I mean, Night of the Black Rose is an amazing book. But anyway, what vampires mean to me, and we kind of touched upon this because
we kind of got off topic. I just whenever
don't worry about it.
Give me Strahd.
Ravenloft is like... yeah. And even when I actually ran the 5th edition module for Joel and whatnot, the Curse of Strahd campaign, even then, Strahd was gone. They had exorcised the dark powers from Ravenloft because they went that extra mile to do it. Like, I gave them the fucking hardest goddamn puzzle I could. It was just fucking, like, insane. And they managed. They somehow managed. So they exercised the dark powers. They killed Strahd and whatnot. But you know what? They never took care of Strahd's Chamberlain, Rahadin. So since he was, like, literally the only thing they didn't either kill or, like, really deal with, I was going to have it be where, like, Strahd had essentially written to Rahadin saying, like, in the unlikely event of that these heroes actually succeed. Yeah, exactly. He was going to have Rahadin take Innistrad, the Magic the Gathering universe, which is like Ravenloft, and he was going to open up a rift between that world and, like, Barovia proper, and he was going to go into Innistrad, find the big vampire account that's there, and bring him back to Castle Ravenloft to be the new vessel for Strahd von Zarovich.
The Innistrad vamps are no joke.
Yeah, I know.
they're arguably worse than Baron Strahd.
Well, that's the thing. This was going to be a continuation of that campaign. So how do you up the difficulty? You know what I'm saying? You bring in like the fucking Magic the Gathering shit, you know.
Yeah, bring in a bigger bad.
Is that Soren Markov? I think.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were gonna bring him in.
I was like, I've lost enough games of Innistrad blocked. I better remember his name.
It's that or
yeah.
He's
They were gonna bring him over.
Too. He's a planeswalker. So then you give then you give Strahd planeswalking abilities. So man.
Basically, he was going to be the new form, like the new template.
Yeah.
Being a vampire planeswalker is kind of redundant almost, because I mean this is tangential, but being a planeswalker essentially grants you immortality, I think, in the MTG stories. So you're kind of just doubly.
But being but just because you're immortal doesn't mean that you're able to like hop planes. So like adding the ability to just be like, who would I feel like being today? Not Innistrad? Yeah, let's go to Innistrad.
Like, yeah, they were basically going to take him, and then I was going to, because there's like a particular, like on the DM's Guild, you can find this in like Drive Through RPG or whatnot. There are stats for if you want a bigger, badder Strahd. Like they've got like a CR 25 Strahd.
Oh, jeez.
So that is what was going to be the eventual like super big bad. Where it was going to be like this CR 25 Strahd who was like able to finally escape the mists of Ravenloft, and like, because you've defeated the Dark Powers in the previous example, there's nothing to hold him here anymore. And so like I was really going to have this thing where like, you know, now you're threatening more than just Ravenloft with the mist. Now
you may have kicked the dog, but you also left his pen open.
Yeah, exactly. Like you really kind of fucked up here, because on the one hand it's like
there's nothing to keep him there now if he gets brought back.
Right.
Yeah. Oof. And that to me is kind of what vampires are. They are I mean, they can fill a number of different roles. Like if you want them to be the sexy vampires, they can be the sexy vampires.
So after Candlekeep then?
Oh, what, you guys want to do Curse of Strahd?
I could do I've never done Curse of Strahd. I'd be down.
Which edition?
5.
I mean, I have the 5th edition one.
Sure.
Are you talking about like which edition inside of 5th edition, where it's like classic or revamped sort of thing?
I just meant which edition of the module.
Oh, because like, I mean, everyone here knows 5th edition anyway, so I would just do 5th edition, because you know it's easier than like taking you guys all the way back to like AT&D
or 3.5.
Or 3.5. I mean, he's been in every edition, so I mean, it's not like. That's actually one thing that like, because Ravenloft is one of those modules where it's like you can, if you run it, you can take those stories to any convention across the country and be like, oh yeah, here's the time that, you know, like I went to Ravenloft, and everyone immediately knows what you're talking about because they've all done it. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's one of those universals.
So I apologize if we keep bringing it back to RPGs, Brian, but I don't know if you.
I mean, well, that's what we do here. You know what I'm saying? Like,
but I don't know if you finished with your answers in terms of what vampires are to you, because I know we got off on a tangent again because I started asking about Ravenloft.
In a box, Ravenloft is in a way symptomatic to what I like about vampires. I like the Castlevania vampires. I like the Ravenloft vampires. I like the kind of vampires who are these old immortal creatures filled to the brim with desire, with some sort of like something that gets them out of their coffin every morning sort of thing, and like actually like drives them forward to do some great and terrible thing. You know, like Dracula is a good example. The fucking movie Van Helsing, you know what I'm saying? Where like Dracula has this thing where it's all like, look, I really want to bring my kids to life. So how do I do that? Okay, I need to find
I don't want
something
them to have to
to
be
power the
undead
machine
anymore. I want them to be actually alive and able to reproduce or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like there's so much that goes in. Like that's a
Or
good movie. And
what's the one with like they have like vampires have taken over, humans are basically just cattle. They have like the special cars that can go through the sun so they can go from like building to building.
Oh,
What's that
it's
one?
got that's the one with what's his name? That's not helpful at all.
30 Days of Night or something? No.
no,
Uh,
30 Days of Night was the one where they're in Alaska.
yeah. That was
Yeah.
with Josh Hartnett. Ethan Hawke is like
Yeah.
he runs like the burrow. Yeah, they're running out of blood, and he runs like
Yeah, he was like, "This is unsustainable." Like the it's like one of the vampires is like, "We've basically like caused our own death," and all the vampires like laugh him off. That was one of that was, I feel like, a really interesting sort of like modern retelling.
Daybreakers.
What was it? Daybreakers. That's right.
Daybreakers.
Because he's trying to figure out how to like, because he's basically like gotten tired of being a vampire. He wants to like see the sun again, but he doesn't want to die. So I think, right or no?
Well, I mean, they kind of played with that similar idea in the movie Satanic Rites of Dracula,
Uh,
where basically Dracula is in the modern day, and it's Christopher Lee. This is one of the old Hammer horror Draculas, and at one point he just stops giving a fuck. So what he basically does is he tries to create a nuclear holocaust because he knows it will destroy the world, and he wants that because he doesn't want to live anymore. He's just like, look, I kind of want to die for good this time, but I'm having trouble actually getting that to work. So hopefully,
so is he just
either
like, is he just like unkillable? Like he's like an unkillable vampire sort of thing? Like he's just
sort of, I mean, he just kind of keeps coming back. You stake him, and he like looks at you, and he's all like, the fuck? Like he actually does this at some point where like he takes the fucking stake out of his own chest and he throws it back at the guy like try harder, bitch.
Does he
it's like stakes, really?
does he like watch the sunrise at any point in the movie?
Oh yeah. Like at one point he's already done that in previous movies. He just comes back.
Mm.
That's kind of meta. That's kind of like Michael Myers won't die. Let's just make Halloween ends.
Yeah, so like
it's very very introspective of the franchise. That's funny.
yeah, dude just keeps coming back in all these different movies where it's all like, okay, look, this isn't working. I need to do something. So either hopefully nuclear weapons will do it, or plan B, nuclear weapons will just annihilate my food source and I just won't be able to like do anything. You know what I'm saying? So like
So does he like become a point where like he can't control his, like, has he tried like starving himself? Is he just like not able to control his hunger at a certain point, or
well, I mean, for a lot of it, Christopher Lee didn't actually really like the whole like because the script writers and him kept having like a falling out where like
okay.
you know he was like kind of constantly battling with them. So at some point, Christopher Lee just always devolves into like this fucking monster. You know what I'm saying? Like he'll just stop talking and he'll just like you know like fucking whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So like I mean that's the reason behind that in a meta sense. But
Like he devolves and can't control his hunger anymore and just
yeah, exactly. Because again, he
VTM
just
rules.
would have
Got it.
he would just have fucking fights with the writers. Anyways, but yeah. And by the way, Vampire the Masquerade. Like we were kind of talking about this in our Discord the other day, where like you know, you guys were talking about like how you know werewolf is always you know some people's jam and whatnot, and that's all well and good. But it kind of ties back to what we were talking earlier when it comes to all the different mythos for the vampire. The reason why you have all these different clans in Vampire the Masquerade is because vampires, historically speaking, have not always shared the same sort of like thing. And that's where the clans come from. It's like, oh, how do we explain this historical thing? Oh, well, it was a different clan.
So yeah, VTM is just attempting to explain why we have all these different like ideas of how vampires work, right? So it's like
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it's inspired by the Anne Rice interview with the vampire sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then, you know, from there, they're like, okay, well, how do we make this so that like we do our own thing and at the same time, you know, like
yeah, so then you've got like, you know, the Nosferatus from like way back, and you've got like the the Camarilla of like the Bram
You've got the
Stoker time.
gangrel who are
Yeah.
always about like the animal sort of thing,
Yeah.
you know.
So you've got like the Blade vampires now. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want the blade vampires, you're looking at the Assamites, or as in the new edition, they're called the Bana Hakim, where it's like they're all dressed in fucking goddamn leather trench coats and shit like that. They're carrying fucking katanas, you know.
Yeah. Well, what was it? I was trying to think. You've also got here's a vampire movie that I really did. Any of you guys see Priest? I think it was called.
I saw Priest,
Yeah, I like
the
that.
one with the shadow creature in the caves and whatnot.
Yeah, the Warrens. I guess they're not typical. They're not. They're never referred to as vampires throughout, but they're basically vampires because they die in the sun. But it's like, it's funny because you have everything with. I think that's the weird thing about like modern vampires is you get like all of these different retellings. So you have like the Anne Rice vampires that sort of create their little like covens, but then you've got like you've got like the hive vampires that are basically like they make a hive that they just like and that they just stream out of and take over the world every night and kill everything within 100 miles or whatever, and then you've got everything in between. So it's like you got the guy in the castle. You've got like, you've got daybreakers where you've got like it's corporate vampires, and then you've got like the animalistic hive ones that just kind of like are basically like locusts that feast on everything.
If we're on the subject of vampire movies, we've each mentioned certain vampire movies that sort of speak to us. So for you, it's Daybreakers. For you, was it the Satanic Ritual of Dracula? What was it called?
Oh, the Satanic Rites of Dracula. It's not
Satanic
necessarily
Rites.
one that speaks to me, but like it's
Right.
something that came to my mind when you're all like,
Okay.
"Oh, vampires want to end themselves,"
Oh
basically.
yeah, yeah. I'd have to say if I had to pick a vampire movie, right? Like if I had to pick one and get rid of the rest, I'm probably gonna go with Catherine Bigelow, with Near Dark. This is when she has a fraternization with James Cameron. So essentially, almost all of the casting was through him. So you get Bill Paxton, you get Bishop and Vasquez from Aliens were in that movie. Um, Vampirism is boiled down. So the mechanics of being a vampire and the blood work and the biology and the mythos are essentially clipped away.
Hmm.
And vampirism is reduced essentially to a choice. It's like in order to be in this lifestyle, they focus very acutely on the stealing of blood. And essentially, you want to live forever, you gotta be a murderer.
Hmm.
And the protagonist,
So it's like the choice of
it's very much a
deciding to,
choice. It's very much all about it. It's a vampire western, actually.
as opposed to something that's like foisted on you
Right,
outside of your
right.
control.
Yeah, well, because that's the thing. The protagonist discovers the world of vampirism more or less outside of his control. But after that, the other like the vampires that he meets are essentially like they don't initially like him because being a vampire is not about having vampirism in this movie. Being a vampire is choosing to selfishly put one's immortality over the right to live of other people.
Mm-hmm.
They discuss amongst themselves whether or not they should destroy the protagonist if he doesn't kill, right? So it's
Because he
and what's,
found out, and therefore it's like either he has to decide, or should we kill him because he knows.
exactly. And what ends up happening is there's this high noon moment. I don't want to spoil too much of this movie because I love it,
Oh my
but there's
God.
there's almost like a standoff moment. There's riding into town moment. It's very much a vampire western, and at the end of it,
Where can I find this movie first of
I
all?
mean,
Because this sounds rad.
it's probably on Shutter. It's probably on any
Okay.
horror streaming.
Was it like a
I have
horror movie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
all you have to do is search for like Near Dark. You'll find it.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. They kind of hand wave the complexities and the difficulties of having vampirism because at the end of the movie, they discover a cure for it because it's not about sticking to vampire canon. vampirism in this movie is a mechanic and is a choice to be selfish to live forever. And so at the end of the movie, it's like vampirism is something you can enter or leave, because vampirism is a choice, not an affliction. And turning it into such a narrative mechanic, there's a purity in this movie.
So is it about, so it's not so much about just the one time, it's about like you choosing to be a vampire, and
It's a
in order to
persistent life.
continue
Yeah.
to be a vampire you have to keep murdering, so it's like that's your,
Yeah.
okay, interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, there are aspects of vampirism that are the same. So there's like weakness to the sun.
Mm,
There's long life.
right.
They sort of touch on the social aspect of vampires who ride with each other. But essentially, vampires are the gang of outlaws in a western. The
Mm,
protagonist is the individual. Like, do I wear this tin star?
mm,
Am I gonna be the only one in this town that upholds the law, or
yeah.
do I allow them to run rampant, or do I run with them?
So they just like roll into town, murder some people so they can keep, gallivanting.
It really is that simple. It really is. And the
I
and
love it.
the individual vampires might be complex with their experiences, but they're reduced to baseness
Right.
in order to live forever. I don't
It's
want to
hedonism.
say any more. Yeah, yeah. Essentially, it is. I don't want to say any more about it because I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it.
I
Um,
need to
but
fucking
yeah,
watch this. That sounds awesome.
yeah. To me, the complexities of a movie can persist, but they need to be moored to a story mechanic for some reason. And this movie is high speed, low drag.
Yeah.
It's all about the narrative with how it has its confines of story, and that's what makes it so strong.
And I think that's why like vampires is such like a persistent thing that like sort of like exists in a loop within media, is because it's like it's ever since, especially like since like Victorian and then like modern day, it's been so like cyclical almost. It's a lot of times it's like I you kind of get it with zombie movies a little bit too, where it's like it's sort of like a reflection of modern day, where like you have this like uh vampires became, there's all this stuff that's happened. You have like the Twilight era of vampires. You've got like the Christopher Lee movie era of vampires. You've got like Blade, you've got Underworld, you've got Castlevania, you've got Van Helsing, and it's sort of like there's all these little like chunks of time, and it's such a versatile monster that you can like throw at people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like just straight up monster movie, because like in the end of the day, like vampires are sort of like this struggle against like of humanity against like evil a lot of times, or if it or humanity's struggle with evil and making that choice a lot of times. So Brian, you've been smirking. I know you've got a comment you want to make or something.
In truth, there are so many different like vampire media sort of
Hmm.
thing. I feel like, and this is the great thing about vampires to me.
Yeah.
I think that like depending on the story you want to tell, because vampires are so broad that you can really kind of like have a whole range of different things, and they mean something different to everyone. Like, and this is the strength of the vampire,
Hmm.
because with werewolf movies, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you do get sometimes a collage, an array of different things that you can do with your werewolves. But a lot of it kind of boils down to the whole thing of man versus beast.
Yeah.
And that's maybe an oversimplification, sure.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's very kind of like common. I don't think anyone would really argue with me about that. But vampires, they have this thing where like you can focus on the point of addiction. I mean,
Mhm.
they do this in the movie The Addict, where you have Christopher Walken as a vampire who's like, embraces this woman, and like they treat the whole thing about like blood as a legit addiction. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It's like but you can do so much more with that. And I find that like That's the real strength of the vampire. I think that the very basic core of what it is to be a vampire changes with the medium, with the story that someone wants to tell, because like rules are not set. Vampires have been so many different things throughout, time that you can literally have them be just about anything.
Yeah.
Even so much where like they are werewolves or whatnot.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like you can have them be anything. You know, Underworld again. Like you have like the vampire werewolf like crossbreeds
like,
and whatnot.
Or the one
Yeah.
where the face fucking unhinges and like.
Same thing with like Blade 2, you know what I'm saying? With like the super vampires and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Like you've got all these different things that you can like have them do. You've got all the different like powers that you can have them. But like the story, the story can be viewed through so many different lenses depending on who wants to tell the story. A great example of this is a movie that came out fairly recently called Bit. And it's about this coven of strictly female vampires. And the reason why they're all strictly female is because they don't allow any guys in, because the leader who kind of like made them all like together sort of thing was this guy who was he's basically like Dracula. They don't actually say Dracula in the movie, but I mean he's basically Dracula.
That's just because of IP stuff.
I mean, more or less, yes. So the thing about it is that like he basically dominates their minds and like has them serve at his like beck and call, regardless of who they are or who they want to be, sort of thing.
Cult leader.
Kind of, yeah. And like they basically, are all like, okay, no, we're gonna shove the motherfucker in a box and we're gonna fucking stake the door shut and we're never gonna talk about this again. Because like he cannot be let out. He cannot be let out under any circumstance. Like they kill him, but he's always going to be around. So they just like lock the remnants of him in a box, and then they start like forming their own coven where they are all like, okay, look, guys can't handle the power, so we're not going to have guys anymore. We're just going to have like us and the girls and whatnot. And
then they base that off of a sample size of 1.
I mean, the way they look at it, they're all like, okay, look what guys have done with the planet anyways. You know what I'm saying? Guys have been in control of the planet for the majority of time, and we kind of have this.
That's fair.
So
I was just curious where they're like, did they try and like found out they can't handle it, or
that actually reminds me of a tangential point, but that relates to the power dynamics of gender tying into vampires.
Well, that's what I really like about this movie, because the main character of the movie is actually trans.
Interesting.
So an interesting sort of thing happens here, because she even acknowledges, she goes like, okay, so what about me? As in like, where do I fall on this spectrum sort of thing? And they're all like, oh, yeah, we never really thought about it too much. It's fine. It's cool. Whatever. And then in a weird way, by reading into the subtext of the movie, because what she does kind of unravels what happens with the group, and it's a really good vampire movie. I almost don't want to spoil the ending, but one thing that I do want to kind of point out is at one point they like encounter some hunters, and the hunters are all like in a bunker, and they're like, well, it's not like a bunker, it's like a fucking trailer. And they're gearing up for war and whatnot. And they're thinking to themselves, like, the vampires are going to be coming any minute. And all of a sudden, just like a grenade, like, falls through the fucking, like, window. And they're like, son of a bitch. And, like, it just blows them all up. And, the vampire ladies are walking away. And they're all like, why do they always think we're never going to use weapons? And I'm like, okay, that's pretty good.
True. There's so many vampire movies where they go, like, completely dependent on their powers. And it's like, you can't tell me that, like, if we're going, like, way back, like, Vlad the Impaler, it was not, like, if we're saying that, like, Vlad Dracul was a vampire, that dude was, like, a fierce warrior that was, like, known for just, like, fucking shit up on the battlefield. So, like, why does it all of a sudden became vampires only use claws and teeth?
Yeah, it reminds me of the comic and later the brief show, Why the Last Man,
Yeah.
where a virus wipes out all the human race except for
Good.
the
It's a
the
good one.
protagonist. Oh, I thought they're like good men are dead. Good.
No, it was like that was a really good graphic novel. Is what I'm saying.
The comic I enjoyed. But yeah, the protagonist is alive. Ampersand, his pet rhesus monkey, and then like some astronauts in space are the only males left. And he's disguised as a woman at the same time that he runs into an actual woman, and he discovers that the lesbian relationships that are forming in a world without men, there are those who are accepting the role of being male.
Yeah,
and so
there's
they're like they're
there's
gluing
like the
they're
power dynamic that's still occurring, sort of thing.
right.
Yeah.
They glue facial hair to their face, and they just assume, I wouldn't necessarily say butch, but they assume like a
Men's
Gender
role.
roles.
traditional societal masculine behavior pattern. And it's almost like, well then what does it mean to be male versus what does it mean to have male gender, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like society just reinforces aggressive behavior on men because of testosterone, or because it's almost like if you remove the gender in this comic, you still have those who are male.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting point that, like, what happens if we prevent men from being vampires? Well, I mean, these female vampires still slaughter these hunters with a grenade, right? And and yet there's one who's trans, and they're like, "Oh, you're okay." So it really makes you think. At the end of the day, morality is, if you strip away everything else, it's decisions. If you can ignore testosterone and progesterone, and you can ignore societal, socioeconomic background, at the end of the day, morality, who you are as a person, is your decisions.
Well, that's the thing with, like, brings you back around to, like, we started this whole discussion with Interview with the Vampire, right? Like,
Yep.
it's like the whole thing is, the names escape me of the, I know Lestat is one of them.
Lestat.
Lestat.
Louis
Sorry.
Lestat.
Louis
And then
Lestat,
who's the main? Who's the other vampire
You're talking about like
from
Antonio
Interview with the
Ban-
Vampire, the movie?
Oh,
Yeah.
Antonio Banderas' character.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so you have the one that, like, adapted to modern society, and then you find Louis Lestat at the end, and, like, who is
No, not
basically-
Louis Lestat. Like it's Louis and then also Lestat.
Oh,
And then
right.
also
They're the two.
So-
Yeah.
So you have, like, you have Lestat, who
Armand.
there we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Armand.
What names do you want me to fucking use? It's been a while since I watched the goddamn movie. So
Then
you have-
fucking study up for a conversation next time,
God damn
dickweed.
it.
Anyway.
Well, I'm all right.
It's Vampire Week, Ben.
Yeah.
Fucking Halloween, brother. You better get with it.
So you've got Lestat, who he did not evolve with the times. We find.
Well,
at
he
the
was
end-
he was stabbed in a peat bog for quite some time.
He was. It's fair, but, like, the main character finds him at the end, and he's towards the end of the movie, and he's, like, subsisting in his rundown manner, like, living off of rat corpses. And the other character has evolved with the times and has become a thing, and it's like you can see, like, the difference between the two, because, like, Lestat, I feel like, always sort of, like, embraced the bloodthirstiness of, like, killing, whereas the other vampire, he's like, we don't have to kill to, like, go on, or, like, we just have to, like, take what we need, and he becomes, like, he makes the moral choice, and because he doesn't decide to, like, become, like, this mindless killing machine, he just, like, is able to, like, sort of maintain his humanity, so to speak, and blend in, whereas the other one is sort of, like, become this monster who can't exist anymore, barely able to exist anymore, beyond spite of the other character.
That's where you get the concept of humanity points in the Masquerade, and it's also where you get the concept of torpor. I think Lestat goes through a far more interesting journey for me, because in Interview with the Vampire, he's essentially torpid. He's in a prolonged state without blood, when they decide to shank him and dump him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he sort of has to grapple with whether or not, going mad, going insane because of lack of blood, but also like he has to face the rejection of his kind,
Mm-hmm.
because they mention if you don't group up as a vampire with others of your kind, it's an extremely lonely existence.
Yeah.
And so when you deprive him of any social interaction whatsoever, and you deprive him of the facade he had of wealth and stature,
Yeah.
and you deprive him of blood, it was very simple for Lestat just to be feeding on muskrats and in the bayou.
Yeah.
You see him around Queen of the Damned, which is a movie of varying quality. But the character Lestat in the book, conceptually, when he decides to reinvent himself as a rock star,
Mm.
you see the journey of Lestat. Like, do I just decide to become insane, or do I just stop caring anymore? And he decides, to reinvent himself, to restructure himself like Louis did. So that to me is far more interesting of a journey
Mm-hmm.
an immortal, quasi immortal being to take.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's just like it's to a larger extent, it's us. We have our highs and lows in life, and we can choose to reinvent ourselves. We can choose to give in to despair. So it's the ebbs and flows, just coupled with the complexities of vampiric immortality. To me,
Mm-hmm.
was always the highlight
Yeah.
of the chronology.
I think that's what's crazy about that movie is like I think that was really the first one that and why things kind of changed was it really more focused off like previous ones were more of an external view of the vampire character
Right,
like a
right. Like
snapshot,
let's
whereas
let's
Interview with
let
a Vampire was like this is the broad spectrum of a vampire's entire experience
Yeah, you actually
in this
follow the
existence.
vampire as opposed to like
Yeah,
third person
you
vampire.
like a third, you get a snap, like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, you get a snapshot of Dracula of how he exists and as he decides to like take over the life of this poor Englishman that thought he was just gonna be help some random noble with his accounting problem.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. Jonathan Parker. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
but like so you get this snapshot of Dracula, you get you have you get Blade, you just get this like little like bit of like how
yeah,
his life is as a thing. But like with Interview with a Vampire, it's like this is how my life has been from the Revolutionary War all the way up to like modern day where I am now, whereas just a little soldier became a noble, like straight through to aristocrat into like now I'm just like a Wall Street thug. Like
that's a good point. Yeah, 'cause, like you think of um, Coppola's Dracula.
mm-hmm,
It's like it's us
mm-hmm,
versus the vampire.
yeah,
You think of Blade. It's like it's me versus the disease, and also
yeah,
me versus the vampire.
yeah,
Interview with the Vampire is like me versus time, me versus insanity,
mm-hmm.
me versus people.
How do
Yeah,
I maintain my humanity? How do I maintain my
yeah,
uh sanity
yeah.
against the onrush of time and in a place where like if I blink all of a sudden 10 years have passed and now everything has changed, you know when I have
That's
all of time before me.
that's a great little tidbit. I think it's from it's the Buffy pilot, the TV show,
Is
where
it?
she knows the guy's a vampire because he's wearing like an '80s polyester suit
Mm.
in Sunnydale. It's
She's like,
yeah, yeah. He's like, oh, come on, you got to update your wardrobe. So, if timing's nothing to you, the subtleties of society are lost on you. It's sort of
yeah,
like
it's like in Interview with a Vampire, Lestat, when you find him in his like decrepit mansion, he's still in his like 1800s garb, you know.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's almost it's almost like it's beneath them, the
Hmm.
minutia,
Yeah.
right?
If you ever want to figure out what it's like to be a vampire in that state, just get really into like technology sort of thing, like get really into like building your own computer, and then like take 5 years off and come back to it. You'll be like, oh my god, I have no idea what I'm doing anymore. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, because like all sorts of things will like, you know, you'll have the basic idea, but like you'll be so far behind after like you take 5 years off. It's like, oh my god, what do you mean like the newest thing is like it is,
like 20 years ago you had to buy all these components individually. Now it's like, oh, I just have to buy this motherboard and it comes with all the shit that I need, and then I need to get the graphics card. But before it was
yeah,
like,
how much does that hold again? What the fuck? How does that happen? Like, yeah.
There's a great science, actually, if we're thinking about things to read, great science fiction story written by a Vietnam veteran called The Forever War.
Oh yeah.
And yeah,
I love that book.
We've talked about it before. The allegory of him coming home post Vietnam and America being so different. Stop me if you've read this, Brian.
I have.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
we can still talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I was gonna let you keep going because
for the viewers,
yeah.
For the viewers at home, the allegory of him serving in Vietnam and coming back home, and society having changed. Post Vietnam is explained in the medium of him going off to fight aliens that are so far away. There's time dilation due to gravitation of the planets. In space time, the farther away you are from a gravitational source.
I think in order to travel through vast distances, you have to go through wormholes, I think.
Yeah, and so in the story, due to relativity, he goes into space to fight these aliens. And by the time he comes home, and standard relativity, it would have been like years. Like I think it's like 16 years or something. They have to have evasive maneuvers to fight the aliens in space as they're returning home, because the aliens have a space fleet that is so far away from where the aliens are living that due to relativity, as they're coming home from this battle, they're facing an alien fleet that is decades of advanced technology ahead of the aliens that they had faced on the aliens' homeworld.
Yep.
So by the time they're coming home, the aliens that they're fighting again are now markedly more advanced.
Yep.
And so they have to have evasive maneuvers going through wormholes. And by the time he gets home, I think he serves like 2 tours, but by the end of the book,
it's more than that. He does the first time. It's like he comes back and it's like 10 years later, and like humanity's like gone on like full mobilization.
Yeah, and so he goes back in,
and then he goes back because fuck it, I'm gonna defend. And then he comes back and it's 50 years later, I think.
Yeah,
and then it's like the war's over. And then he's like, but there still have to like have people like watching. So then he goes back and just basically like camps out by the wormhole for a while. And he comes back and like humanity has evolved. Like it's like 500 or 5,000 years later. And humanity has evolved beyond even having like gender or race or anything. And then I think there's a final time he comes back and they're like, hey, we left a spot for you, but we're about to like transcend into energy beings. So see you, bye.
So what ends up happening is his shore leave, his returns to Earth. What ends up happening is he becomes less and less familiar with his surroundings. And as he decides to go on more tours, he essentially gives up trying to feel at home on Earth. The entirety of the Earth population, all the races mix. So it's this mulatto race that achieves perfect hegemony, perfect societal harmony.
Yeah.
The language is incomprehensible to him, so he no longer can hold a conversation. There's so many people on Earth that there's state-sponsored homosexual relationships, and having children is banned. And he feels so alien to the environment when he comes back that he can only
like basically because of like how the society is. They're like, oh shit, we have too many people and we live too damn long. So like, sex has become like actually like completely repulsive to the entire like race or whatever.
It's also dangerous because they don't have the resources to handle reproduction anymore.
Yeah.
There's too many people. So what ends up happening is they're like living museum pieces, and they put them in like a home for rickety old vets. He's in the prime of health.
Yeah.
These are
He's
space
like
marines.
25.
They're space marines. They're all jacked and everything. But he can only really connect with his fellow soldiers, and they put him in like a museum home, and he's like, fine. You know, he just chooses to live out his days, and you know,
Yeah.
and in a way, the vampire. Every time he takes a look back at society, it's going to be eventually unrecognizable to him.
Mm-hmm.
You can think about it in the context of Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a kid wondering why in The Hobbit the elves are focused so much on like getting drunk. The wood elves are like just drinking and like playing harp music. And you know, they're artisans and everything. I'm like, why aren't you guys in flying cars if you've been around so long? Well, guess what? The impetus to create, the impetus to advance, the drive to question your surroundings and mechanical law, natural law, isn't there if there's not the crawling specter of mortality. Right? There's no reason to push yourself if you're not going to die. It's like I could spend 800 years on how to learn the harp.
Yeah, if I could like fucking live in a treehouse for the rest of my goddamn life and not have to worry about paying bills and shit because I can exist on like a slice of bread a day, like why would I build rocket ships? You know, like,
right. and so. Well, see, the Tolkien elves, you know, they have a society. They, you know, there's no forced immoral compulsion for them to maintain their lives. They don't have to like just murder people, right? As a vampire, society at best is underground. Your society at best is in Lestat's case.
Your best case scenario is you're just a counterculture.
Right.
You know,
in Lestat's case, he was living with two other vampires.
Yeah,
and this was going on for
decades. One who hates him, making him or making her a vampire, and the other one who hates him because he doesn't want to have fun anymore.
Right. So all we see here are the supposed benefits of being a vampire,
or curses. That's why it's the curse.
There's
not a blessing.
Yeah. Life goes stale.
Yeah.
At best. If you're not being torched, hunted, staked, life at best will grow stale.
Well, that's the whole like thing behind like, you know, Dorian Gray. You know, he's somebody that went and lived that hedonistic lifestyle because he had no reason to care about like even like he could freaking have as much goddamn opium as he fucking wanted and had no concern for a he could like fuck any horror prostitute he wanted and he didn't have any worry about catching an STD. Like nothing affects him. You know?
Yeah. Oscar Wilde was very, very attuned to what could be construed as immoral in that time period.
I was just gonna say, like, there's an anime that I've seen before, where they examine the concept of like what it means to be immortal, and one of the things that they touch upon is like, okay, well, if you're immortal and nothing really kills you and whatnot, all of a sudden torture takes on a whole new meaning for you because what happens when you just can't die but you have an entire existence of pain?
Yeah.
So I mean that's but getting back to the vampires here for a second, because I mean, like, I think there are maybe like one or two mediums where Dorian Gray is like actually portrayed as a vampire. I could be wrong.
No, he just like dallies with them. You know, you have like League of
the whole immortal.
He's like, I hang out with vampires because they get me.
Yeah, and then in LXG, he can immediately regenerate wounds as well.
Yeah. So even if she like sucks his blood, he's like, I'm fine now.
Yeah. That's probably the most memorable line in the movie is where some bad guy's like, "Who are you?" You're like, "What are you?" And he's like, "Complicated." And then he kills the guy.
Yeah.
uh, was
Uh,
was was in the original book, was Dorian was
The,
he a bad guy?
The Alan Moore comic.
Yeah.
yeah, he was
Yeah,
how he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
yeah. The comic, the most glaring difference. Let's see, because
Because I know Alan Moore hates it, but
Well, no, Mina was the biggest change
that's right.
by far because
Yeah.
like she was not very much who she is in the movie, where
Mm-hmm.
she's like this fucking vampire. Like, no, she was like heart of the team, sort of like just this ordinary person who was also like going
She
around
wasn't
like
a sexy vampire. She was just there.
Oh yeah, I
right?
know.
She was just like she was like their handler, basically, right?
She was the every woman. She
Yeah.
was the character that the reader could connect to.
Right.
yeah.
And well, the other thing is
But
the
they had
invisible.
Tom Sawyer be that, but
Right. The Invisible Man in the comic. In the movie, he's kind of a rough and tumble, kind of roguish type. In the book, he's a scumbag.
yeah, he's a dick.
He's a serial rapist
Yeah,
in the comic.
which is
Um,
that's true to the source material. But,
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there were some glaring changes in the
Mm-hmm.
film. But
Obviously.
yeah.
I mean, you're gonna go from one medium to another. You're gonna like the only thing that I can think of offhand where it was like you go from one medium to another and it like basically stay the same was like Hellraiser, because you actually had Clive Barker, you know, who
Right.
writ,
Right.
you know, Hellbound Heart.
Well,
Basically,
that's like
write
what our
Hellraiser.
theory became from a couple weeks ago. Brian was like, I think Clive Barker, he just wrote the book as his like pitch to the studio.
First draft, yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's his first draft of the script for the first movie. Like,
yeah. So we're coming short up on time here, and I guess what I really want to leave everyone with, because we've had a pretty fun discussion of like vampires and whatnot, even though it hasn't been like as productive or as like learned as, say, for example, last time when we talked about vampires. Because last time when we talked about vampires, we were a lot more informative towards, you know, like, oh, this is the history of the vampire, this is where they come from, sort of thing. Whereas this time it's been a lot of just back and forth about like, you know, vampire mediums and whatnot. So I guess leaving the audience with something to kind of like close out our talk on vampires. I want to get your guys's like 5 favorite vampires. Can be from book, can be from movie, comic book, you know, historical sort of thing. What do you guys think is like your 5, like your apex, like your top tier vampires?
Top tier vampires.
I mean, are we allowed to just say Dracula 5 times? No.
I mean, if you're going to say Dracula, you should probably also be all like this version of Dracula.
All right. So my big, I'd say, I don't know if I have 5 off the top of my head, but
Okay.
Vlad Dracul from like folklore.
Okay.
I would say I really enjoyed Bram Stoker's Dracula as well. I mean, you gotta go with Blade just because. I also enjoyed Van Helsing. I guess that's also Dracula in Van Helsing. But I really did like. I guess I have 6. I'm gonna say I have 6. So like I really enjoyed what went on in the Daybreakers with the guy, the remorseful vampire that's kind of sort of, you know, trying to fix things. But then I also I really like Interview with the Vampire because it sort of like really like hones in on that sort of like the like how immortality would affect a person side of a vampire, as opposed to just like the pure like bloodthirsty monster or like the seductive vampire or like, you know, all of like the common tropes. I feel like that's why sort of like Interview with a, we made Interview with a Vampire sort of like where sort of things got turned on their head a little bit in terms of vampire in the modern day. And I think that's why, is because it looked at that immortality that they're gifted through a different lens, as opposed to it just be like sexy Transylvanian man, you know.
Okay.
That's me. Fuck. I meant Laszlo. That's the real best vampire. I forgot about Laszlo.
What we do in the shadows.
Yeah.
Right?
That's 7.
Sorry. I guess I had more favorite vampires than I thought, but I mean, Laszlo's all of those all in one. Let's be real.
That's right. For me, I'm gonna go Lestat. I just have to. There's such a narrative development of the concept of immortality, you know, with caveats. I just really like the journey of Lestat. I'm gonna go Christopher Lee Dracula. I feel like I'm gonna limit myself to a Dracula. I'm going to go with his rendition.
That's fair.
It was really close between him and
Let's be real, like I didn't really pick like 7 because I picked like 4 iterations of Dracula, so
yeah. It was really close between Christopher Lee and Coppola Dracula.
Oh, are you talking about like Bela Lugosi, or are you talking about like Gary Oldman?
Gary Oldman's rendition. It was really close between those two. If I had to pick a Dracula, but I'm gonna go Christopher Lee because of the body of work, the amount of screen time he got to flesh out that role. So we'll go Christopher Lee Dracula, Lestat, the narrative Lestat. I'm not exactly specifically saying Tom Cruise as Lestat or anything like that. Severin, which is Bill Paxton's character in Near Dark. I think it's the quintessential hedonist vampire portrayal. I'm gonna go Alucard from Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I think the concept of vampirism being like inheriting the sins of the father, having to live with the dubious reputation of one's parents, and also being born a vampire. I think he covers that very well. The Netflix anime, I thought depending on the season, it can be a little too edgy for me. But
I couldn't get it past the first one. When it came back for this, I like binged this first season, and then after the second, I was like, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to see like babies getting ripped from wombs again.
Yeah, I was like, this is a bit much for me. So yeah, we got Alucard, Lestat, Severin, Christopher Lee Dracula. Oh man, that leaves me with one left. You gave me 5. You gave me 5. You know what? Probably Strahd. Probably he's a you could a detractor could say he's a derivation of Dracula, but I just think the connection I have to D&D, he was, probably the first edition D&D module that I DM'd. So just the connection to his character and his tie into Ravenloft as a dimension and everything, I thought was really, really cool. So those are my 5.
Okay. Suppose it's up to me then. I'm actually going to put Strahd at the top of my list. Okay. One, because like D&D has made a very large impact on. Yeah, sorry.
As your number 1.
Probably,
yeah. 5.
As my number 1.
Okay.
Because again, D&D has made a huge impact on my life, but also the way in which a DM can play Strahd can be like almost infinite. You know what I'm saying? So I really feel like, he has an established lore, so he has like a thing. You know what I'm saying? Like the dude fucking read a book, like the I Strahd book, which by the way is hilarious. You guys should all go out and buy it. Did you guys not know about I Strahd?
No.
No.
Oh shit!
Maybe that's your next pick, Brian.
Is this a parody of iRobot or something?
No. It's an actual book that like they made, which can serve as both a D&D prop because it's Strahd's fucking memoirs. It's literally his, journal.
Oh, okay.
But like it's an actual book. Like you can find it on
I
Amazon
think we
like, right
found your
now.
next book suggestion, Brian.
No. I mean, as much as I like that book, I'm not going to put you guys through that.
Why not? I'll read it.
For one, if I'm going to run an actual Curse of Strahd game, I don't want you guys to like immediately write. No.
Fair.
It's fine.
We'll do that other one.
I'll maybe like I'll keep it in my back pocket for like
Just so
I have to interject with informing you that the party I DM'd for, when they found Strahd's diary, they stole it and then taunted him by reading it aloud to him.
Yeah. That's something that you can do with Lord Soth. I don't know if it works against Strahd though. Like
it incensed him. That was about it. But
sorry, what's the rest of your top 5?
Okay, so I got Strahd von Zarovich.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take a slightly maybe a controversial take here because if we're only going with like one Dracula, I think I'm gonna go with the Dracula from the Van Helsing movie.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah, I could go with that. His motivations
dude was extra
like
as fuck, and I love it.
Yeah,
but he owned it.
He did.
He totally owned it. Yes.
Like a guy with a bow tie at a wedding. It's like you have to have the compliment personality. He just went with it. Like he wielded that role.
Yeah. He's like, I will make my race in charge of the entire world.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
No.
He didn't have that hypnotic quality, but that's okay because like a lot of other vampires do that anyway, so we're fine.
Yeah, well, his whole thing was
he had
everything else.
He had the Jim Morrison like hedonist kind of draw to him, like because the whole point of Dracula is like his wives are sort of all pale in comparison to his true love. The Van Helsing Dracula was like, "Come to me, my women." It was very much like he loved them all very much. So like, you help me fill the earth with vampires. He was, yeah.
I love it. Anyways, so okay, that's my Dracula. It's my 2. I'm gonna go with another controversial pick, and I'm actually gonna pick one of the vampires who's in Vampire the Masquerade. Okay. Specifically, I'm gonna say that I really loved the way B. Dave Walters portrayed Victor Temple in L.A. by Night.
Okay.
I thought that like for those of you who haven't like watched L.A. by Night, B. Dave Walters is a
is that a show or is that a?
It was airing on Twitch, but like you can find the whole series on YouTube right now.
Okay.
And B. Dave Walters, for people who don't know, is a personality who has written for like Dungeons and Dragons comics, including like Dungeons and Dragons: The Darkened Wish. She's also the DM on Black Die Society, which is currently airing and whatnot. Like there's all sorts of different things that he's involved in. And one of the things that he was involved in for a long time was the show LA by Night, which was a tabletop Vampire the Masquerade game for the newest edition that kind of dealt with everything that happened in the LA kind of like area and whatnot. And B. Dave Walters played a vampire called Victor Temple. And I really thought that like throughout a lot of that, he kind of grew into like, and he stayed very much the same in terms of like who he wanted to be or like, how he portrayed the character. But like there were evolutions to him where it's like, at first, he's talking about like how you need to pull the trigger, how you need to do this, how you need to be ruthless and do that and whatnot. And then like as time goes on and he gets like influenced by the rest of his coterie, like, there are moments where he's all like, oh, well, look, this is the person I was, but this is the person who I'm trying to be. So like he's got that internal conflict still. And I don't know, it was a really interesting portrayal of overall like the vampire aesthetic, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
He's this incredibly rich guy who could like really have anything he wants, but all he's really trying to do is try to let the other vampires know, like, hey, we need to quit warring in the streets with each other. We need to focus on our real enemy, which are the fucking feds who are like, finding out about us and like coming for us. You know what
The
I'm saying?
vamp hunters.
Yeah, exactly.
The hunters.
So I don't know. I really liked his character. I liked the portrayal there. So that's 3. I'm gonna go quick fire here. I'm just gonna like throw it out there. I really liked fucking what's his name? Goddamn Green Goblin.
Willem Dafoe.
William Dafoe's portrayal of Count Orlok from the movie Shadow of a Vampire.
Okay.
Have you guys seen that one where it's basically like the behind the scenes? It's like a mockumentary sort of thing of like what happened, when they were like filming Nosferatu, and what happened if that guy had actually been a real vampire.
Oh.
Yeah, it's actually really good. And William Dafoe plays
so
a
like there's
fucking
now a
phenomenal
list
vampire.
of things that I need to watch now because of you fuckers. So I think
Oh, yeah.
you're gonna need to send that shit to me. So,
I'm just gonna like make up a huge fucking list.
because that sounds
here.
amazing.
Oh man, it fucking is. Like at one point he's all like,
I'm a fucking I am a like anything with Willem Dafoe in it, I'm like 100% there. Like nothing. Anytime he shows up, I'm like, I'm in. So,
Shadow of the Vampire. You need to watch that one.
All
Got one more. Who's it gonna be?
one more.
I got one more. Who's it gonna be? Just because because I fucking can. I'm gonna go with the vampire from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, who will not die. You know the one I'm talking about, where he's got the stake in him, and he's like,
There are not many who draw fondly from that movie.
I remember seeing that movie when I was like a fucking like I don't know, I had to be like 10 at the time or something like that. Or I have no idea how old I was. And I just remember like seeing that character, and I'm like, I don't know, it's just something inside me, or because I was like, there's even that like end credit scene where everyone else is dead and he's like still in the corner. He's like, ah. It was almost like that Peter Griffin moment where he just like keeps nursing his knee and whatnot. I just thought it was fun. And anyway, that's our time.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for watching. We will be back on Wednesday with a continuation of our Candlekeep campaign. And next week, since Monday is going to be Halloween, we're going to have our show on Tuesday instead, because some of us have children that have to go trick-or-treating and other such funs, and I assume you guys do too, or might, or whatever, or you have fun stuff to do because it's Halloween. Where we will be doing our book talk on Foundation by Isaac Asimov. So that's our next couple weeks done. And then that following Saturday, we're doing a special episode where we will be doing a extra long episode of Call of Cthulhu, where we will be doing what adventure, Brian?
It's called The Dare.
The Dare. So, which is going to be collaboration with original GM, who you may have seen with us a couple weeks ago when we just kind of talked about our favorite RPG moments and stuff. And again, thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you again on Wednesday. And thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.